So exciting, so exciting. Always great to be here with the incredible, great, amazing, impactful leader, Gretchen O'Hara. I can't come up with enough words.
Your accolades are too much, but thank you very much.
But they're all true. They're
very
all true.
excited to be here.
Gretchen O'Hara, Channel Chief, Vice President of Worldwide Channels and Alliances here at the Global Goals Summit today. What an incredible title. Well-deserved. Splunk is changing the world. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what your message is from Splunk. What is it that's happening right now around centers around customers and how you're building this digital resilience?
Yeah.
And can you share more on the definition of digital resilience for this audience and the millions of people that will watch this interview on Ideagen TV?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, we started to see digital resilience, quite frankly, as we made our way through the pandemic. We'll just start with that to just give everyone kind of a grounding. Digital resilience is making sure that you as a company, you as your data, the way you prevent from cybersecurity attacks, the way that you allow for essentially non-disruption in your business. So if you think about what could happen around cyber attacks in the supply chain and breaking that down to what could happen, and we've seen this where companies have been held ransom, for millions and millions of dollars. Universities just recently have shut down, and students can go to school because full universities have been held hostage. We learned about the FAA and some of the issues that happened around there. I think every day you're pretty much seeing what has become, I would say, not only a national agenda item with our government, but across the world is cybersecurity and cybersecurity threats, bad actors, geopolitical actors, and how do you make sure, whether it's intentional and or sort of mistaken based on your environment and the deployment of your applications, how do you make sure that you are resilient to those type of attacks? And it goes beyond just the core technology, whether that is making sure that you have the right antivirus and firewalls and the data protection you need. It goes into everything else around, are you resiliently trained? Are people understanding the digital signs to be able to go make the course corrections? So there's a digital literacy component of that as well. And then there's, government regulations, and are you set up to make sure that you are protecting data, such as GDPR and EMEA and other parts of Brazil, or sovereign cloud capabilities that are becoming very important within sovereign nations. So you have sort of this intersection of cybersecurity threats, global and regulatory requirements, and essentially skills to make sure that you are digital resilient. And so Splunk is squarely in the middle of making sure that we're connecting that sort of business and technical issue together so that people can be secure.
Yeah, and what strikes me, and which is why I love cross-sector, is that you mentioned a lot of things that maybe I'm not familiar with in terms of some of the acronyms and some of the areas where a cross-sector convening like this can help folks understand what's really happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what we're talking about here is Splunk is leading the way. There's data privacy, there's digital resilience, there's protection of data overall, there's digital literacy.
Right.
And what is that? It's changing every day. I mean, where are we going with all that? We've heard about the value of data and data values and currencies and marketplaces and all of that. So you were founded at Splunk in 2003.
Yeah.
Wow. And boy, has the world changed so much. We're sitting here at the NASDAQ, but can you only imagine how much the world has changed in just such a short time?
That's right.
And all the issues. And thank you, by the way, for all of the support that Splunk is giving to so many individuals and governments, et cetera, across the world to make the world better and safer.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very proud of that. Splunk is a company that has a culture of people, culture of innovation, and a culture of giving back to the communities. And so, we've been very purposeful in where we give our investment and our funds, but we've basically invested about $100 million in some of this work around the data divide and making sure that our partnerships with nonprofits and others can ultimately scale to help address some of these issues.
Incredible. And I know there's another area that I think is so important to you personally and professionally, and that's the data divide.
Yeah.
I know that that is something that, and I'm personally interested in this as well, as is Ideagen, is what is it and how can we tackle it and address it and fix it?
It's a relatively new concept, and I think we're all very used to the digital divide, and we've talked about that for quite some time, which is the digital divide is essentially about access, right? You know, how do you make sure that you get access so that you can be more productive and essentially rebalance the scales of inequity? But what's happening now, and I think we are just waking up to this, is data is king. Data is actually the sort of new access, right? And we've seen that through the explosion in the consumer world with ChatGPT as an example. So, you know, I was talking last night at dinner, and for example, I had led our AI business at Microsoft before I went to Splunk, and I was fighting to make sure that both the commercial and public sector understood the value of AI, and I would say we were very nascent in that work. And now all of a sudden it's table topics with everyone from your grandparents to your child. And that's how fast, to your point, things have changed. And so in the last 10 years, we've tenfolded the zettabytes of data. You can think of petabytes, it's massive data sets that we've never seen before in our lifetime. And so as we think about the technology revolution continuing, we went essentially from, you know, our industrial revolution to our technology revolution, and that being core to access. Now it's about data. And we will actually see the continuation of that growth of data over the next couple years, all the way through 2025. We'll see it double again. So what do we do? So what does that mean actually then to anybody when we think about data is so important and data is king to all of us? Its benefits, of course, are we get access to incredible information that makes us smarter and more productive. It makes us safer and more resilient as citizens and certainly you know, at companies across the globe. But it also starts to create an inequity with countries that don't have access to data, or geopolitical climates where they won't give access to data, or poverty or underserved communities where they can't afford to leverage that kind of data. And so what's happening is essentially the commercial side of the business has the money and the means to actually leverage data in a very smart way. But when we think about the public sector and our NGOs, nonprofits, we think about citizens in different communities or in different countries across the globe, there's none. And so we're actually creating a larger set of inequities between people. They don't have the same access, the same ability to use those insights. And so it becomes a marginalization, if you will, between that. And so the data divide essentially is, first we have to wake up and realize that data is driving the way that we think and we make decisions. We're seeing that every day with AI. But we also know that we're pulling people more and more apart because it's the haves and the have-nots. So I'll give you an example just to make this real. When we were in the pandemic, think about the data that was used to help, quite frankly, all of these people to understand where the infection rate was, where, you know, how safe you were in the community. Think about the notifications on exposures. University of Washington Medical was one of the first, and COVID landed in Seattle first, one of the first, you know, data science groups that actually took advantage of data and then shared that essentially out into the world. Mayo Clinic and others, you know, caught on to that. But if you were lucky enough to have that, you were essentially had some protection as a citizen. Right. That's the good side. The bad side is, you know, UCSF was partnering on that same kind of data. The public health was trying to get information out into San Francisco, and the data sets were so big and so complex, and the company that was assessing the data was on fax machines. This is a true story. This is true. It was on fax machines. And so even though you had this massive amount of data, the public entities didn't have the infrastructure, the ability, the means, the digital literacy, anything to capture that. Right. So what did they do? They bought more fax machines, if you can believe that. I don't even know if I could use a fax machine anymore. but use more fax machines. And so, the idea behind that is now you have somebody without.
Right.
So, that is kind of an example, just to bring it into, sort of human terms of, what that actually means.
And that's a very stark example.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the younger folks probably don't even know what a fax machine is.
Yeah. Probably not, yeah.
So that becomes really interesting.
It's not through the internet, we'll put it that way.
It's not. It's not through the internet. So you talk a lot about this concept of shared value.
Yeah.
As it relates back to the digital divide. What is that?
Yeah. So shared value is, quite frankly, when I believe that the private sector can come together and focus with the cross-sector on having a more equal balance between our financial gain and ROI on what you use with the data, but also putting that expertise and investment and human capital into things that will have a broader social impact. And so what do I mean by that? For example, Splunk is partnering with Kenya, as an example, to look at the water supply issues in Kenya. And right now, two things happen. One is there's contamination in the water, and the water is very scarce, and that obviously is a big issue. There's also water leaks that happen, and so in this very small set of water that Kenya gets, they're getting leaks across the way. And so let's just say I started with 100 gallons, I end up with 2 by the time it gets back to the people, and everyone's in a water shortage. Yeah. So what does it mean when you use data and closing the data divide? Well, we can provide sensors now through the water line that can predict and have analytics to say, this is going to fail, this pump is going to fail, we're going to shut off this for contamination. We found a leak, we're going to shut that off in minutes, not in days or weeks. So you start to apply data and insight from the data to more social impact, societal impact areas that benefit everybody. And that would be, I think, what we think about as shared value.
And that's incredible. And it goes back to the ethos and the pathos and all of the empathy that's involved with all of these companies that are here today represented, and the public sector. We heard from Ambassador Papakostas that the world is in a state of change.
Yes.
And there is turmoil in the world. It seems like it's accelerating. But we do have some amazing folks like him and the country of Greece leading the way. They're going to be taking over the presidency of the UN Security Council. Right. And it's great to see a country like Greece, the birthplace of democracy and many other things, leading the way on these issues.
Very excited to see that. And I think, to your point, sort of foundational in understanding that.
Exactly.
Issues,
and so our audience today is likely interested in hearing a little bit more as it relates to bridging the data divide to create more equitable, more sustainable, and ultimately more healthy futures.
Right.
You're leading the way on that. You're passionate about it. What's happening? What else do we need to do?
Well, I think you look at certain societal impact areas, and you think about healthcare and access to healthcare, and quite frankly, the inequalities still of healthcare in underserved communities, or certainly across specific countries. That is obviously a very, very big one. You look at things like poverty and hunger, and being able to have a better set of predictable insights on where we're seeing impoverished areas within the communities. This is an area that Splunk is deeply engaged in, which again is providing that data and insights to help understand better around things like consensus data and where we're seeing those populations of poverty level and how to go into the communities and help. So sort of closing the poverty level and the hunger level, helping establish where food depots are, and as helping understand sort of where and how we make and place those bets. And then of course there's climate change and all of the sustainability work we're doing, and that is extremely challenging because we look as a company and in the private sector as ROI. I invest $1, I want to get $1. I want to get $10 back. Climate change is very hard. You invest in things as a company, we make climate pledges, we talk about the sustainability, we commit to our United Nations SDG goals and so forth, and yet you don't see ROI in a month, in a quarter, in a fiscal. It is a long-term investment that we have to make collectively across sectors to do this, right? And I think that's one of the things where when we continue talking about closing that data divide, it's understanding that some of these efforts that we have to do collectively, we won't see the ROI today, but we will build a prosperous, economic, sustainable future, in my opinion, that when we all come in to focus on these things at the global level, we can make change, and actually companies and the public sector will all benefit from that over time. We just have to be committed to the change.
Well, and you're committed, and Splunk is committed, and what's beautiful about the global goals is, from our vantage point at Ideagen Global, as you know, they're not political. They could be, but they're not for us, because it's all about solutions. You want to help achieve the goals, bring a solution to the table. This is not a forum or a gathering or a platform for disagreement. It is a platform for agreement. And it's also a platform for authentic conversations.
Right.
Like this. This is what you're doing. It's matter of fact. What is Splunk doing? And getting those deep insights into how you do it and why you're doing it is also important.
Yeah.
And by the way, those 17 global goals, I always say this, were agreed upon by all 193 member states across the planet, all unanimously. One of the only times, if not the only time, in the history of the United Nations where anything was agreed to unanimously. And so, and by the way, the United States of America also agreed to these goals. So take the politics out of it, and let's talk about solutions, and that's what Splunk is doing.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And what I love about Ideagen, and to your point here, is you can pick any one of these or all of them. And this is the group that has the capabilities, quite frankly, to make decisions and to collaborate to actually really make that change. And I think convening global leaders to address these things that are long-term, they aren't short-term, but we can start now to impact the future. And we have a long ways to go. The data divide is essentially the next sort of challenge in our, inequity that we have to go look at. And if you apply data across every one of these goals, you can think about that becomes a way to solve and potentially a way to make it worse against each of those. So we've got to be able to make sure that the infrastructure, the access, the digital skills are all available and accessible to all of the communities. And that will help essentially, in my opinion, against all of the global goals.
Incredible. So. Gretchen O'Hara, Splunk, what is your final call to action for our global audience?
Well, I am a big believer of making change and taking action soon. And so I would just ask all of you as global leaders, what are your commitments today? How can you connect with other leaders across the room to actually be able to take that action and scale? And so I would just encourage you all to connect with each other and sort of how we have a 1 + 1 = 3 for scale at the globe. Let's do that, in this forum. And the second thing I would just say is, if you want to have a deeper understanding of the data divide and what your company or your organization can do to support it, go to Splunk.com, and there's a whole bunch on our social impact and data divide work. I'd encourage you all to take a look, and if we can partner to go help address that, we certainly want to do it.
Love that.
Yeah.
And by the way, thank you again to the NASDAQ, and Splunk is NASDAQ listed. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. All right, thank you.